Um, Again, I'm looking in the chat room to see what kind of comments we're getting and questions that might come up. This is a shift for a lot of folks in terms of thinking how to do classes online, and we also get a lot of questions about how does one do supervision online in terms of telemental health, and what kinds of things, what kind of options are there available for folks to do that. I'm curious what types of courses people are dealing with and how they are transitioning from we'll start with that. Maybe we'll get into some of the more clinical pieces later on, but how are they transitioning from what is a face-to-face course to a online variety?
Yeah, I think that's a great way to get us started, Marty. I want to remind everybody too that we've had 2 of these webinars already. The videos are up on ACES Online, so you can view those. They're available, and we've been through so many topics to this point, but there definitely seems to be some standout things that we've talked about over the course of these last 2 webinars. So we want to make sure we cover some additional things here as a part of the resource. I saw a question about CEs. This is not a CE eligible webinar. However, there are ACES webinars for members that do provide CEs. That schedule is also available on acesonline.net. So I wanted to answer that question really quickly too.
Seeing some comments about people who are using, well, Aaron is doing a career theory course and has guest speakers come in. It's already been hybrid, she says, so it's getting guest speakers to come in and running it synchronously with the guest speakers who are already scheduled. One of the things they've had at our university, and this might be true for other universities too, you can't offer any synchronous education outside of the set hours for the class. So I can't say tonight at 10 o'clock because I'm up, we're all meeting at 10 o'clock to do this or do that. It has to be within that block of time, which creates some problems given some platforms that we're working with. I'm teaching a group class and we break into small groups, and so that kind of makes it difficult to do it if you do not have a pro or an enterprise account with Zoom. It makes it difficult for you to do that and have simultaneous groups going at the same time. So you have to do some configuring of that, but we're restricted to those hours where the class meets because they don't want to shift that from anything else.
So as I'm looking at some of the chats, it looks like there's definitely similar experiences in terms of what folks are looking to transition. Is there anybody who wants to get on? We can unmute you and you can join the conversation, talk about some of the things that you've been doing that you feel like might be helpful to the rest of the audience here. If so, let us know in the chat and we can unmute you and bring you into the conversation. One thing that was interesting that I thought I saw here, Marty, was that you know, in addition, there are a lot of folks that are looking for, you know, different ways to bring in the group process part. And like you said, Zoom can be difficult unless you already have an enterprise account set up and an agreement already set up so that that's prepared and ready and you can do breakout groups. But it's often the case that your LMS, your learning management system, will have some type of video component or some type of meeting component that's an add-on. Somebody just mentioned Big Blue Dot. Others are Bongo or UCU, Blue Jeans. There are several out there that are part of your LMS already that other programs may be using, particularly if you're using, it might be being used in other programs that were already online or hybrid. So you want to make sure to check in with your IT folks, your instructional designers, even your accessibility office to make sure that those aren't tools that you already have and just haven't been utilizing in your program. What's nice about these is generally it's a university license. So if somebody else is using it, you can jump on board and have that as a part of your course or your courses. So it's definitely something to check into. I see that Mike wanted to talk a little bit to us about a couple of things. Let me see if I can
Eric,
bring.
there
Yeah,
are a couple of people. Bianca Augustine would like to speak to actions she is taking to ensure that students' resources don't negatively impact grades. And, I have a few students that live in low resource areas, and I'd like to hear some of those potential solutions. And then Mike is also wants to talk a little bit about training using standardized patients. So why don't we start with Bianca and then go to Mike?
sure. All right, Bianca, you should be able to unmute yourself now and
Okay, hi,
join us.
good morning. So one thing that I did is yesterday, or no, I'm sorry, day before yesterday, I sent out a Google Forms document to all of my students, asking them to let me know about their resources, right? So I asked them what technology they had available to them, being that here in Virginia, all of the public libraries are closed, as is the university's library. And I know that those are the computers a lot of our students rely on. So I used that survey to find out from them if they have computers or laptops at home, if they have tablets or iPads, or if the only way of completing course material that's at their disposal is a smartphone. And that is the case for some of my students. So what I'm doing is I'm moving the deadlines for all of their assignments to the last like 2 weeks of the semester, because I recognize that a lot of my students also are parents. So with schools being closed, their kiddos are at home as well. Some of them are having to also work from home. So I don't want those constraints and not having childcare available to harm their grades either. I'm also ensuring that all of their assignments can be completed from a smartphone if necessary. So I'm not taking off points for APA formatting, since that's something that's really tricky to do if you're typing everything from a smartphone. I'm also, in lieu of presentations that they were supposed to have, I'm having them just kind of present the information in like a typed list, so to speak. Since that's something that can be completed from a smartphone, but doing a PowerPoint presentation or something of that extent would be really difficult from a smartphone. So I really urge everyone to kind of ask your students what's available for them. Also, I'm not making, so I'm doing our meetings as synchronous Zoom meetings, but I'm also recording them so that students can watch them if they're unable to attend the synchronous meetings, being that, like I said, they might have children at home and things of that nature that make it difficult for them to attend. So I also encourage us to be kind of flexible with attendance, as this might be really difficult for students right now as well. So those are a few of the things that I'm doing to make sure that they're not having computers at their disposal or having other things like childcare and whatnot they're trying to balance, making sure that those things aren't negatively impacting their grades.
I think those are all great in terms of ideas, and some of them that I haven't thought of myself. So you have what in situations do you have students that don't have secure or good internet access?
I do. Some of my students inform me that they don't have high-speed internet at their homes. So for those students, I mean, I'm being understanding to the fact that if you don't have high-speed internet, then it's probably hard for you to participate in Zoom meetings. So instead, I'm making sure that those are recorded and that I'm uploading my PowerPoint presentations in a PDF format so that it's easier for them to view from their cell phones as well, since some of them, their only form of internet connection is through their cell phone. And they might also have limited data. They may not have unlimited data plans. So I'm being flexible as far as attendance and participation and all those things as well.
Yeah, one of the things we need to remind students that if they might not have the best available equipment, but many of them do have smartphones, and a lot of these applications have smartphone apps that go with them. And so that's a potential for access. And even if they have access to Wi-Fi through their smartphone, they can still access many of these apps without going against their data plans. So.
Yeah, something else you mentioned too that I think is really helpful when you look at transitioning like a PowerPoint to a PDF, if you can save it as a reduced size PDF, it can be easier for students to download. Sometimes those really pretty graphic heavy PowerPoints that are translated into PDF are still really large files, but you can save it as a reduced sized PDF that will help in terms of being able to download that and with a lower connection speed. So that's something to consider too. I really appreciate you sharing.
Yeah, absolutely, no problem. And as far as accessibility, it's also important for us to remember that we may be tempted to like scan things from home and upload for students to look at. But if our students have to use accessibility equipment where it reads it aloud to them or anything like that, if we're scanning it as an image as opposed to a searchable PDF, then their technology can't read it to them. So that's putting those students at a disadvantage right now as well. So if you're uploading additional reading materials and whatnot and supplemental materials, then you need to make sure that if it's a PDF, you can do Control or Command F and search words. If you are able to search words in it, then it means it's compatible with their accessibility equipment. But if you're not able to Control F and search for words, then it's not accessible. So that's something to be mindful of as well, since I know a lot of us are probably going to be uploading supplemental materials to try to help students in these transitions.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's a really great point to think about. Something that's come up, I think, every time we've had these webinars thus far is that one of the first calls that you should make if you're able to is to your OAC office or the individual responsible for OAC, just to have somebody who can take a look at the types of things you're doing, particularly if you're not used to course development. This is something new, and you just want to make sure that the materials that you have in your course are accessible and that you're meeting the needs of those students. Oftentimes it's a lot to think about and consider, right? So it can be great to have an extra set of eyes for somebody who can, go in and help you check that out. So again, thank you so much for sharing. I really appreciate it. So we'll bring Mike Mariska on now and have him talk with us a little bit. So you should be able to unmute in just a second. All right, Mike, you should be good to go.
All right. Hi, hey Marty, hey Eric. Thank you both so much for doing these. Really appreciate it. Just wanted to share a little bit of what we're doing over here. So we have we had worked a while back to set up a minor program in our theater department to train standardized patients, which are they're basically they're actors who work at hospitals and other places so that doctors, nurses, so on can train with them. And we've trained a bunch to work with us in our counseling skills course and our group class and a bunch of others to just act like patients. So we're a bit set up already to do this, but what had me thinking about this and wanting to bring it to the group is I was talking to our theater instructor, the head of our theater department, and he shared that yes, they've moved their classes online as well, everybody has, and that the students are bored to tears and they are thrilled at the opportunity to work with our skills class just as the chance to do something, to be able to, practice their skill and to have it really mean something, to be meaningful in this sense. And it's also not only that, but it's helped out a lot of our concerns about confidentiality and issues related to technology, because we don't run into the same problems if it's not a real counseling session, if they're playing a client or playing a role. And so we have them right now working with students in our skills course to practice skills and to also do recordings of their skill practice that they can then submit for evaluation and grading. And yeah, it's not perfect. It's not like a face-to-face interaction, but it's better than nothing, and we're thrilled to have it. I'm also looking into possibly using them, and I had planned to do this live face-to-face near the end of the semester, and we're not 100% sure if we'll be reopened by then. So I'm also looking to see if I can get a group of 6 to 8 of them to act as a sample group, and then to let students practice some of their group counseling skills with them as well in my group counseling class. So just wanted to throw that out there. We also have professors using actors in the assessment courses and a few others. And it may be something that you can train these acting students relatively quickly to portray a realistic and convincing client for people to either practice skills with or to practice assessments with. But we found that the acting students, the ones who are stuck at home right now, are thrilled at the opportunity, and so it's been a very welcome thing on both sides. And so wanted to put that out there to folks.
That sounds, it's interesting because I know students, faculty who've done that deliberately connected with the theater sort of groups, classes, and it seems like it's an extra assignment or that for them, and something when we're living in a face-to-face world, it seems like a little bit of extra work for them, but not living in a face-to-face world. Mike, you're telling us that the students are really craving this type of ability to practice their art.
They really are. They really are. It's a chance to practice for them, but it's also a chance to connect with other people. I mean, and this is an aside, it's not necessarily related to instruction, but I found that mostly my students in particular have wanted just to talk to someone and to, share some of their anxiety and to hear from other people. And so I've started holding office hours through Zoom that folks can just drop in and talk to me. But we found that undergraduate students as well, it's the chance to practice their craft in sort of a new medium, but it's also a chance for them to connect with other students. And, we've had to be careful in terms of the feedback that they give. Sometimes they have a tendency to want to give feedback on, well, you should have done this to help me, or you should have done that. And we're like, okay, you're not quite trained in that. We appreciate it, but so instead we structure the feedback that our actors give mostly along the lines of, this was what my subjective experience was like being, counseled by you. It sounded like you were really listening to me, or I felt cut off here, or those sorts of things. And what we found is the actors not only really appreciate the chance to practice, but they really love and jump into the chance to give feedback. And then our students love getting this feedback. And so it's been a really positive experience on all sides. And depending on how it's done, our instructor for the course can also listen in to sessions really easily and give feedback sort of live in session feedback. And she's been working really hard to set things up sort of asynchronously so that groups can practice at different times during the day, and she can pop in and listen. And it does lengthen the amount of time she spends with the class, but she's talked about it being a really positive experience.
Yeah, it might be, it reminds me of sort of one of my favorite approaches to doing supervision, which is interpersonal process recall, where you're actually sitting back down with the pseudo client and going through what was going on when this was happening. And that seems real powerful.
Yeah.
So, Mike, I want to thank you.
Sure.
I'm curious about some of the ways people are doing group work. And Kevin, I sent a direct message to you to ask if we could bring you in, and I'm going to ask Eric if he can bring Kevin in to talk about how he's doing his group work class using Blackboard Collaborate.
Hi, sure. Give me 1 second. I'll get him on with us. Just to clarify, Marty, that's Kevin Tate?
I'm sorry, it's Kevin Tate.
Thank you. All right, Kevin, you should be able to unmute your mic and join us.
All right, can you hear me?
We can.
Great. Hello from Brockport, New York, everyone.
Kevin, I particularly am interested in this because I'm running a group class and I'm using Zoom in lieu of using Collaborate. So I'm curious about how you are setting up the groups and how they're running.
Sure, yeah. So the course I'm teaching, it's called Self and Society. It's sort of an entry-level course, but we do fishbowl style groups and also lots of small breakout groups. So within Blackboard, if you have that LMS, you can create, there's one of the tools is called Collaborate, and there's a main course video meeting room that looks and feels a lot like Zoom or Skype or any of the other platforms. But one of the nice things is you can build, like I've got 5 extra small group rooms built on the same page, so that we're going to try this next Tuesday. We'll meet as a whole class in the main room, and then I will break them out into their 2 smaller process groups to meet separately simultaneously. And the thing I haven't figured out yet is how often I'm going to pop in and out, because we can't do the fishbowl observations, obviously. So, I've let them know this is a test run. So we're going to try breaking them out into their small process groups, let them do their work for an hour, come back together as a large group, process what happened, but also process what it was like meeting in these, video style small group rooms. Then we meet 2 days a week. On the second day a week, we do a lot of triads and dyad work. So I will break them out into 4, 5, or 6 small group rooms to talk. We're going to be talking about a thorny ethical issue, and they'll break out into those small groups, talk, and then we'll go back to the main room to process again. So, trying as much as I can to model what we would do in person, but I'm sure at the end of it, we'll talk to each other. And the way I've talked to them about this and some of the other stuff we're trying is using kind of design thinking, that we are not going to try to make it perfect. We're going to come up with a solution, try it out, and then get back together and figure out how to refine it together. And I find that's trying not to put the work on them, but also, I'm an older person. I know that a lot of my students know technology better than I do, and so engaging them and helping to design what we do has been helpful too.
There's elements of that to me sound like action research in your teaching. The
Right.
fact that you're going back to them and asking them to help redesign or question about what the process is like. Do you know how many students do you have in the class? Do you know if there's a capacity for Collaborate?
Yeah, I mean, the capacity for Collaborate is 500. It's huge. I only have 14 in my class. We keep this class in particular intentionally small because we do the fishbowl dual groups. But yeah, there's huge capacity in Blackboard.
Yeah, and at least on my Blackboard, we have 2 Collaborates. We have Collaborate and Collaborate Ultra, which sounds
Ultra's
like
what I'm
a
using.
cheap light beer.
It does. It's actually the better version.
I keep forgetting that it's Ultra. And that one I'm looking at testing, particularly for my psychopathology class, where we give them a case, they work into smaller portions of treatment teams and parts of what would go into a case description or a case analysis. And then we bring them back for a treatment team as a large group for a treatment team interaction. So I'll probably be playing around with Collaborate Ultra for that purpose.
Yeah, that's what I've been using. They actually deactivated the old Collaborate for us because Ultra seemed to have more functions.
Yeah, Collaborate has a lot of JavaScript patches that you have to put, because I first started with that and I said, no way, because it was just horrendous to set up and get going. And I just recently tried Ultra because it was there and somebody said that was a better option.
Yeah, so it looks good on paper. We'll see how it works next week.
Okay. I'm going to encourage people. I'll put the information in the chat feed. We have a Slack group for counselor educators, and if these ideas, if you're sharing ideas or you have things to share, You can always share it to the Slack group as a document or as part of the chat text or as a thread in one of the channels, and that will be helpful because I know Mike has received some requests for some information, and you might receive some information too, Kevin, for requests on how you're doing it. So a place where it will sit or where it can sit, people can go back, is within the Slack group. So I'll put that information up, and here's all they've sent out. Oh, this is about KCREP and COVID-9. That's another topic that's going on. Eric, have you got something you can bring in?
Yeah, I wanted to add, one of the questions that was asked is whether or not there was something comparable for Canvas, like Blackboard Collaborate. And in Canvas, there's not a synchronous meeting platform that's part of Canvas that I'm aware of without some type of add-on, right? If somebody is aware of one, please let me know. It's not one that I've seen. I use Canvas a little bit less frequently, but have used it for a number of years here and there. Most of the time I see this as an add-in. Kathy says there's a conference feature on Canvas. The current section that I'm teaching doesn't seem to have it active. I was just looking around and kind of poking around to see if I could find it. So that may be an option to check into, whether or not that's something that's activated or able to be activated in your courses.
Does anybody know about conferencing with Desire to Learn? Natalie, yeah, go ahead, Eric.
I was just going to say, I use Desire to Learn primarily, and we don't use the native feature there. We use a program called Bongos, formerly known as UCU, and it can accommodate some pretty large meetings. The thing to keep in mind about whether or not you're going to have audio clarity and good connection for all your students is not necessarily the size of the group, but their individual internet connections, right? So you want to check out those minimum connection speeds. Oftentimes, if I'm going to have a large group meeting with students, I try to prepare ahead of time, and I send them to speedtest.net. I'll see if I can put that link in here for you to just gauge whether or not they're going to have a good experience. I have them go in and run the speed test, send me the results so that I know whether or not they're meeting the minimum requirements for that, that particular service. So that's something to think about too that I saw here.
A lot of people are talking about Zoom. For those of you who are not familiar with it, it's an add-on external service. They recently posted that, there's free Zoom accounts which allow you to do 40 minutes, and they've extended that. They've extended it in the sense that if you go to zoom.us/education, I think they give you an opportunity to sign up for a Zoom account that has a full feature to it, given that you're being affected, and everybody is, by COVID-19. So that would be another option if you don't have it within your LMS. One of the things that Eric and I both like about it is it requires a lower bandwidth need for people to be able to use it as a video conferencing piece of software. It also, of course, has just the audio and just the audio without video options too. So Zoom could be a possibility. That's in the education world. That's in the non-sensitive client information world, in the non-HIPAA kind of world where you're doing a discussion about a concept or an idea. Zoom, however, does not have the capabilities of doing a business associates account, which is what's needed for one of the things that's needed in order for it to be HIPAA compliant. So Yeah, it can be HIPAA compliant. You can request that. Sharia is saying it can be requested to a HIPAA compliant account. And it's different. You have different levels of ability to do that. If you are on an enterprise account, which is a much more expensive account that universities generally buy into, then you have the ability to do BAA agreements. If you're on individual accounts, I don't think you can. At least we haven't found that out. And Eric's just posting that to the chat.
Yeah, it's been our experience to this point that you need to have at least that enterprise level or business account. And like Marty mentioned, we like Zoom particularly because of the low required connection speeds. So that's something to look into. I posted the speed test link in here. It's free. It just takes a minute or so, and then I have my students send me a screenshot or even just type the results in and send it back to let me know that they're able to do that. And yes, Zoom does have breakouts, but again, you need that larger package, that enterprise or business subscription, in order to have those breakout rooms. So is there anybody else in particular that has something that they want to offer, they'd like to come on and share? And sorry, Marty, I cut you off.
No, I like your idea of seeing if we have folks to come on and share.
I really like the leave a penny, take a penny that you talked about earlier in the other webinars. So the whole intent and design here is that folks can share, of course, here in the chat, but we can also bring you in to talk and to share and help provide some of your guidance.
Elsa wants to share creative clinical hours.
Great. All right, so Elsa, you should be able to unmute and join the conversation.
Hi, everybody. Hope y'all are doing well. So some things that some of my practicum and internship students no longer have clients that they can work with for various reasons and depending on the sites. And so it's really easy to think of a lot of indirect hours, but the hardest part has been direct hours. So I've been trying to think of creative ways of maybe having them create psychoeducational recordings that they could share with families about how to keep sane and cope with staying home with everyone, or messages that they could, check-ins that they could do with people who are elderly and by themselves at home. Of course, that's more unique because those online services are harder to do. But just kind of getting the packages together that maybe they could do virtually, that they could send out to people and share in ways that are just proactive and psychoeducational, and count those for direct hours. So would really love to hear if anybody else has any other creative ways that they could also collect hours. And so that's it, really. I'm just, trying to build a.
Elsa, we're in a difficult situation. I'll speak for Kent State.
Yeah.
Probably speaking out of turn, but you won't tell anybody, will you?
No, of course not.
We're trying to wrestle this issue because our university has basically said we need to pull all students from their sites, internship sites, whether the internship site has closed down or not. So we have some clinical practices that serve a population at risk and at need that continue to remain open. And we have students who are placed there. And so the university said, no, you need to pull everybody from their sites. This should not prevent them from graduating on time in May. And you need to come up with alternative ways in which they can get their clinical hours through telemental health.
Yeah.
And that's a dilemma for us. We're actually going to meet virtually as a faculty tomorrow to figure out what and how we can do with that. So.
Well, don't forget that peer or role-playing counts for direct hours according to KCREP. So if that's also something, and I'm wondering about setting up some way that they can meet with other students across the campus virtually to provide some connection, some, I want to say soft counseling, if that's even a word, but just some connection and normalizing and coping skills for people who are feeling anxious and shut in.
Yeah, and some opportunity to do that. We have a on-site clinic that services quite a few of the students, and I don't know as of yet if they're making any adjustment in order to be able to service students. But you know, you want to have access with situations like that. You want to have access, immediate access to supervision,
Right.
because of the risk that could be involved with counselor trainees. So let me. We have some other folks. Ajitha mentioned that they have some ideas for collecting hours. So let's see if Ajitha can come in. And Eric, can you set that up? I know he's working in the background trying to help people with audio and a lot of the questions that are coming up.
Yep, I will get that set up here in just a second. I did want to say really quickly, in terms of what counts for direct and indirect hours, you want to make sure that you check into those things and make sure those are within KCREP guidelines. That's, you know, obviously something that programmatically we want you to check into and make sure that it's appropriate for you. All right, so Ajitha, you should be able to unmute and join the conversation.
Okay, I think I unmuted myself. So thank you for giving me permission to talk into it. This is like really a great information medium from ACES. Thank you for doing this. I'm teaching school counseling. So I have practicum students in school sites. It's very interesting and very chaotic right now, but I just heard back from my by my students that some of the site supervisors that are school counselors are working remotely with their students. So my supervisees who are students are able to do check-in, check-out via phone or FaceTime. This is done under the school regulations with the permissions of the principals and also following the HIPAA regulations. That is something they're able to do. And there are some sites which are not actually doing that. So one of my idea which I'm trying or thinking about implementing is giving my students different case studies to work with. So I did find there are several books which has school counseling or school setting case studies, which has session by session illustration of how the client was helped or the student was helped, to help them have a reflective learning approach. This is something I'm trying to implement so that I can kind of like help the students with hours, because all my students have average hour of 15 direct and 30 indirect, and we're talking about practicum students. So it's kind of a concern, but we're trying to push it. So that's what I'm trying to do.
Yeah, schools have, I mean, with the school sites actually shutting down, you really have to come up with some creative measures and in coordinating it. Same for mental health centers and clinics, but with schools, the schools were kind of the first to shut down. So I appreciate those options. I'm going to bring a question to the group, and I'll start by answering it, and then we'll see if anybody else wants to come in and chat with the answer. I'm wondering if people are keeping students connected in community with such a quick change to distance learning, especially in those classes where strong relationships have been built. And I'm seeing some other comments coming up. So when this started to come down, I was actually in Washington, D.C. for the week with some international teachers, and getting them out of Washington and getting them home was a big challenge enough in itself. But I'm teaching an overload this semester. We have a faculty member that's out, and so I'm teaching one of his classes, and I have some doc student support and GA support in it. So we started Zooming and talking about strategies last week, knowing that we were going to go online fully this week, and trying to come up with solutions to how we're going to teach the course the way we would like to teach it. Ironically, I had a course that was all online that this semester I had to take and put as a face-to-face course, which meant I had to change my teaching strategy. And now it has to go back to an online course as such. However, I want it to come back with a lot of the components that we added. I have been sending out more emails to students and the student classes, trying to keep them abreast of ways to connect and what's going on in terms of the content, how the calendar is changing. Every time I think of something that I forgot in the last email that's a new reality for me and for all of us, it winds up going into the next email. So I'm trying to keep the students connected to the class, the content, and let them know they're being taken care of. The other issue, I think, is you have to make yourself available, as many students are new to this technology. So if we're going to do something in Collaborate Ultra, or if we're going to do something in Zoom, I've set up office hours and opportunities for students to drop in and test their technology with me, just to test the interface so they can get more comfortable with it. And it gives us a chance to check in too. So that's one of the things that I would suggest. If people have other ideas, please jump in. There are some, I'm going to post the link to the Slack group, and so people could support the Slack group. I'm also going to post a Google Doc, a Google form that we have, that if you have an idea and you submit it to the Google form, it will wind up on the ACES site with your given credit for it, of course. And it's a way that we can start to build one of the places people can go for different kinds of resources that you're using for your teaching and supervision.
Great, yeah, and we talked about this a little bit before with the previous two webinars. I think holding some type of virtual office hours is really helpful just to stay connected. I like the idea, Kathy. Thank you for having a thread on your discussion board or available to students for Ask the Professor or questions. If you can add discussions or areas within the course just for students to connect, that's always really helpful. Some of the things that are being done out there are using some of the not the popular social media trends, but different services that allow connection outside of the LMS, right? So your institution may have a community board, a blog or a message board that you can use groups and have your students connect to. One thing that's really helpful, I think, within your LMS, your learning management system, whether you use Canvas, Desire to Learn, Blackboard, Moodle, any of them, you can ask your students to make sure that they have their notifications turned on. Make sure you have good directions for that, so that when you do send out communications or you invite them to join you or to connect, they get those notifications immediately. Some of this is just that it tends to fall behind or tends to be less easy to connect to. And I always make that a regular part of my announcement to say, look, here's where you go if you want to connect, you want to socialize, you want to share ideas. Make it a separate space from that academic space, but at the same time accessible enough for everybody to get a hold of. GroupMe is another one. That's a great example. Thank you, Kevin. There's tons out there that you can use, and we've referenced a couple in the previous shows as well. So I'm looking around a little bit. Is there anybody else who wants to come on and share a little bit? Okay, Aaron, I can get you on here. Aaron wants to talk a little bit about GroupMe and Flipgrid. That was the other one I was thinking of. So Aaron, give me 1 second and I will get you unmuted. All right, Aaron, you're on with us. Should be unmuted and ready to go.
All right. So good morning, everyone. Almost afternoon here, and many thanks to Marty and Eric for doing these webinars. I know we all are just in this place of having a bajillion questions, so I appreciate being able to learn from everybody on the call. I thought I would just share about 2 apps that I have used, and I also shared in the chat, and once I can figure out how to share in Slack, which Marty's asked me to do, I will put it there as well. But I just shared a Google Doc that has some tools that I have used and that I sent to my faculty. So hopefully those are helpful. I do want to just preface by saying that these are tools that are generally free, and you can use them on your phone. So I know that if you are concerned about students having connectivity through laptops and other devices, these are kind of phone-based apps. And I will also preface by saying that they're not appropriate for any kind of supervision because you wouldn't want to be sharing confidential information in this space. But if you are looking for tools that I saw some comments about sort of community building and just engaging with students, I think they could be used asynchronously. I haven't used them synchronously yet. But these are 2 possible options. So I'll talk first about GroupMe since that's come up already. And GroupMe is a tool that I'm finding a lot of our students already use themselves because they set up, if they're in a cohort, for example, or in a class, they communicate with each other often through GroupMe. So it's a text, kind of a group chat type of app. And the nice thing about it is that you don't have each other's phone numbers. So if you were to create a chat, you would need to download the GroupMe app, and then you would invite your students into that space via email, I believe. And you can also just share the link to that chat space with them in an email if you need to send that out that way. There's QR codes and a couple of different ways to connect, but the nice thing is that nobody's sharing their phone numbers. So certainly you could just use it for communicating, and obviously kind of like virtual office hours, I think, students are always on their phones, and so having them log into an LMS is great if you can get them to do that, but we know that students will often have their phones, so to me it's easier to reach them that way. And just like with office hours, you probably want to set some boundaries if you're just going to be using that for communication. I thought I would share with you a way that I used GroupMe recently, just because kind of a trial. And I submitted this also, Eric and Marty, to the idea sharing link that you all had with the information about the webinar. But I used it as sort of a scavenger hunt. And it actually worked really well. I made it optional, so it wasn't, required for students to do. I just kind of wanted to test it out. But what I was able to do, and this was for a career theory course, but I think you could do it for pretty much any course that's content driven. And I started with an initial challenge, and it was something like I'm active on Twitter, and so I said go to Twitter and grab a screenshot of a tweet that I have put out that's about college and career related content. And then the first student who did that, then they posed sort of the next challenge. So over a period of hours, and this was all happening asynchronously, so it wasn't tied to class time. Again, it was just totally a pilot, but each student, whoever was first to respond, set the next challenge. So over that period of time, we had, they came up with really interesting things for people to find. And sometimes it was find an article about career development that's related to a particular population, post a picture of someone who was a major career influence for you and tell a little bit about their story. So it was a lot of just different kinds of things, but they did a great job of just staying kind of in their lane in terms of the content area and then just issuing different challenges. And then I took the last challenge to kind of close out that period of time. So it was interesting to use it in that way and, kind of fun. And I think it was just helpful for them to see that I was willing to not only participate with them, but help them to see that I was thinking about creative ways of engaging them. So I think I'm going to do it again too, and I'm not exactly sure how I'm going to work that into the course, but it was a fun way to do that. The second thing that I have used quite a bit recently as sort of an alternative to discussion board is Flipgrid. Again, it's another phone-based app that's free, easy to just set up an account. You as the educator can have you have access to an educator dashboard once you create the account. And so you set up essentially what they call grids, but it's basically places where students can post videos of themselves. And I believe the cap is 5 minutes, so they can't do videos that are longer. There may be a different version that allows you to do longer videos, but I've used it as a replacement for a discussion board. And of course, now that so many of us are online, I think what students will like about it is that there's a visual. So in my case, they were reflecting on prompts that I'd given them about material that they had read. So again, I think it's applicable to a lot of different topic areas and courses. And it's interactive. There are also ways you can put like stickers on it and, do different kind of fun, goofy things. So I think students will also appreciate that kind of a platform too. And again, it's really easy for them because they can do it from their phone. And again, I always participate too. So if I have a prompt that I'm giving the students, then I typically tend to model with the initial response, and then they can go from there. And they can see each other's videos too, and they can even comment back if they want to do that. So I thought I would just share about those two things as potential options for engagement and community building. All right, I think that's it.
Those are all great, good ideas.
Yeah, for sure. All right, thank you so much, Aaron. Yeah, we appreciate that. And oddly enough, both of those have been brought up here and there, but we haven't really had a really good overview of those yet. So I appreciate that. WhatsApp was mentioned here, although it does require phone number exchange. So there's definitely other platforms out there that you can use outside of traditional social media to have students connect. Is there anybody else that would like to share, bring some ideas? We can get your mic live and have you join the conversation.
While you're looking at that, there's lots of discussion in the chat room about KCREP and what they will accept in terms of hours. Angeline said KCREP sent out an announcement, and it's in there. It says it won't accept role plays for direct hours, nor are they adjusting the required hours. I think I can't and won't speak for KCREP on this, but I think we should all take a look at what's being posted on their site and what's being sent out clearly in making decisions around that. And a lot of these things change from day to day. So the difficulty is keeping up with it. Again, I'd suggest, I just set another thread up in the channel in the Slack group called Just Resources. So when people post something in a discussion, they can pull that out and just put the resource in that channel for people who want to seek it and seek it through there. So do we have other ideas or folks coming up, Eric?
Well, I don't see anybody yet. So maybe just go back and look at some of the questions here and try and talk a little bit about that. Just taking a second here to catch up.
This is a sin in radio, dead air. You're not allowed to have dead air like this, Eric. You're trying to solve, you're trying to look for questions that people have. I'm trying to repost the Slack address as people has asked to do that.
Yeah, and you know, there's something that came up for me too. A lot of folks were having audio issues, and I noticed just over yesterday and today that services like Ring Central, Bongo, GoToMeeting were having some issues just with lag time, and I have to wonder if some of that's due to just the amount of people who are telecommuting and using these services right now. You know, we've had pretty good luck with GoToTraining so far in our last 2 webinars, but we have probably about, I don't know, 3/4 of the people that we had in the last one, and twice as many issues with audio. So it's something to keep in mind too, as you're working through using some of these tools, and more folks are telecommuting and really putting these tools to use. You might see some delays and some issues, especially during peak hours, you know, during your kind of 9 to 5 traditional work hours. So Susanna has a question. What if any of you are working, if students do not have internet at home? Obviously there's coffee shops, libraries closing. Yeah, and I mean, internet access is something that we've talked about quite a bit. There are a couple of different initiatives out there. I believe Verizon has one. I think Comcast, Spectrum has one, in which they're trying to provide some really low cost or even free temporary internet services that we can recommend to students. I know at the same time that they have to have the technology, the physical hardware to be able to do that. But there are gradually, we're starting to see some resources come out related to those. And again, it's going to be really, I think, really regional in terms of how accessible those things are and how readily available those things are. I know that there's been talk, and this is anecdotal, of some universities talking about using incomplete policies and those types of things to help shelter students who might not have the technology to complete their coursework, you know, and be able to continue once ground operations resume. It'd be interesting to see if that pans out, you know, just from a you know, policy perspective, whether or not that's something that's really going to be pushed or not. But obviously those are huge considerations.
Yeah,
Marty,
Susanna's question, I think, is really challenging the assumption that everybody has this high-speed access, and how do we deal with it? And I've got a few students who are concerned about taking an online test because they live in valleys and areas where their internet access and as well as their cell phone access is very spotty. Some responses I've seen to that is, well, it becomes an old-fashioned correspondence course where you email or physically mail out what needs to go out to the student in order for them to complete the work that's associated with it. That's assuming we will continue to get federal delivery of mail. But that is one of the options. Another question that came up was about completion and doing telemental health issues, having students doing telemental health in Ohio, and this is going state by state. So there's not a federal response to this, and there hasn't been a federal response to a lot of things. But from a state by state standpoint, we have in Ohio, they have the licensure board has given permission for students to perform telemental health services during this crisis. And so anybody who's a CT, counselor trainee, can do that. However, it creates a problem. It creates larger questions. Just because they have permission to do it, can they ethically do it? Is it become a billable service for the agency? And what's their training and what's their supervision around providing telemental health issues? So all of these things come up and still remain, even though the state has kind of loosened itself the state of Ohio has loosened itself for trainees to be able to do services like that.
Yeah, and I think it's a really good point, Marty. There's a lot of telemental health webinars and trainings being promoted at the moment to really help expand your knowledge and ability to support students who may be conducting some of these hours and supporting some of these initiatives out there. But there is that pedagogical question in terms of whether or not students are prepared and ready to enter in that space and what kind of ramifications that might have. So I think there's a ton out there to get into and to learn.
There was a post that went to CESNet, and I reposted with Lori Ann's permission to the Slack group that has a whole slew of resources. We've also had some other things on the Slack group that have been posted as part of resources too. But in those resources, Lori Ann talks about the ethical standards we are still held by if we do telemental health. It doesn't absolve us from having to perform in an ethical and sound manner. So.
Yeah, it's great. Okay.
And Kevin just mentioned he's home with the kids and they're asking for lunch, so he has to leave. We do have a channel on the Slack group called Children at Home. Someone requested that we create that channel to talk about things that you can do when you have kids at home.
Yeah, I'm pretty impressed to this point that I've only had to mute maybe twice for the dogs and kids. So it's been a pretty successful webinar.
Yeah, I've got a situation that's interesting because my wife works in healthcare, and yesterday they decided, and she works in health education and with a hospital, and they decided that they were going to work remotely. So we are both shacked up at home and trying to deal not with the child, but with a dependent and very socially dependent 18-month-old German Shepherd. So she originally was going to work in the den with the German Shepherd, but the German Shepherd wanted so much attention that we've now moved her into the living room on the living room table with 2 computers, and you just have to make these adjustments. It's crazy.
And something, it makes me think of something you talked about earlier in one of the earlier webinars, is that we really want to extend the same types of courtesies to our students and those who may be adjusting to learning and conducting their work in an online platform, that responsibilities in the home environment has really changed, particularly during this time of social distancing. I think it's really imperative that we prepare ourselves for the frustration that we might experience in learning these new technologies, but also with our students who might be really challenged to engage in a way that they've never been asked to before. So it's something that came up, I think, in every webinar thus far, is to talk about, having that patience for yourself in learning this process and what you might need to do and the new tools that you have to take care of, but also extending that same thing to your students. I think is really important to keep in mind.
Yeah, do we have any other folks who have some ideas about class conversions or things that they might want to share in terms of how they're making the transition? I'll start, and then we'll see if some more come up in the chat room. For those of you who use Blackboard, I do most of my exams all of my exams face to face. Even with the online course I have, people come in and take the exam. But now that everything's online, I needed to find a format to be able to do online quizzes or online exams. And I had to do this once and swore I'd never do it again, was create a exam through Blackboard, which was a horrible interface to do it, very clunky. It again, I think a lot of JavaScript programming in it, so it made it really kind of difficult to do. I finally got it out, and it was because there was a student in need that could only take it that way given their medical concern and condition at the time. So I did that once, and I said, I'll never do this again. Well, come COVID-19, last week I was gone in Washington, as I mentioned, to work with a grant, and I said, this will be the week that I give all my exams. Well, class got canceled, and suddenly I'm looking for something to put those exams online, and I knew Blackboard wasn't it. So I found a service that I'm paying for out of my own pocket. It's, I don't know, $19 a month or something like that. And it's called classmarker.com. And I'll put that in the chat room. And it is a much more user-friendly way to create exams. I took my exam from Word and copied and pasted it in. It feels a bit like forms or any of those types of online forms that you're familiar with, and was able to set it up. Had one of my graduate student assistants test it. She loved it, and she said it worked fine. And then last night delivered a psychopathology exam online, and I kept waiting to get emails from students that something wasn't going right. And I didn't get any emails, and I thought, well, maybe the whole thing went belly up. And I went in a couple hours later and checked on it, and everybody had been able to successfully complete the exam. So if you're looking for a potential alternative, there might be other ones out there. This is one that I Google searched for, found it, tested it, and it seems to work fairly well. Classmarker.com. There's a cost to it, but I'll pay for an app that I know is going to work and that I'm going to use versus mess around with free stuff and face consequences of that.
Yeah, and I can add in terms of D2L specifically, Brightspace, developing a quiz or an assessment there, it's tedious. It really is. It can take a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of energy. It's funny, we're sitting with my wife at a table and developing a quiz, and she's like, "What are you doing with your mouse?" Because there's so many times that you have to click just to get through the screens required to add a question, that it sounded like I was just messing around with my mouse. So it can be really cumbersome just to get those quizzes set up in the course shell. It may be beneficial to look at some of these services that are going to provide you with more options and just a more user-friendly way of setting those up. Canvas isn't quite as bad. And there's some nice statistical options. I think that Canvas gets you a really nice format, but at the same time, it can be equally as cumbersome, just that setup part. We had some discussion in the last webinar about the types of resources provided by textbook publishers and authors, and I think those are really, really great. But at the same time, when you bring those in with some learning management systems, they come in what's called a SCORM-based package. They come in these huge kind of files that you just load into your shell. and then you have to go in and manually select the parts and pieces that you want and make your changes there. You can't make any changes prior to pulling it into your course. That can make it really, really cumbersome to use. Some of them will break them down and have those individual resources for download or for integrating into your course that you can select which ones that you want to bring in. But even then, they can be set up in such a way that it requires more time than it's actually worth, and can actually be quicker to create your own quiz or assessment there. We talked about Cengage a little bit and what they offer there, and Pearson's kind of resources. I think that which one was that, Marty? So Pearson has one. There's MindTap, and there's another one.
I can't remember. Those are the two that I remember was Pearson and MindTap. That's Cengage is MindTap.
Right. Pearson has one it's My Test or My something, but it's pretty close to the same kind of services that they would provide. So looking to some of the questions here again, Leah had some specific questions, Marty. Oh, you addressed it here in the chat. Okay, so you're working.
Yeah, I just responded to it about class marker in terms of, yeah, it's interesting. You can set the window of when the test is available. So I set it so they can all get access to it at 4:30. And then you can set it to end like at 7 if you want. That's just the access window. You can also set a timer on it. So someone theoretically could come in at 6 o'clock and start the test and have 2 hours to go if it's a 2-hour test. So supposedly that window is only when they have access to it is also different than the length of time. As long as they start it within the window, they should be able to complete it outside the window. Now, I'm not telling my students that. And as a result, I'm just telling them this is when the class starts and this is when the class ends. You have 2 hours to take the exam or whatever time I give. I've had to make an adjustment with that and had to make a duplicate exam, which is not difficult to do, for someone who had time extension as part of their accommodations. So I set up a separate link for them that gave them time and a half of the time on the clock for it. A question about, is anybody doing anything with national exams? Barbara, I don't know what to tell you about that. I do know that some of the testing sites have been closed down. And then I saw some chatter on CESNet about the CPCE and something about either questions that are available or ways that they can do that. Okay, Amanda asks about how do you use the Slack? Well, once you get into the channel, once you get into Slack, you'll see, at least I see on my screen, a bunch of different channels. Those are threads. And you can select a thread to post to. First thing you might want to do is go to the channels link and either right click on it or click on it. You'll see then a list of all the channels and the channel descriptions. So currently we have a channel for children at home. Somebody from the group requested that, I created it. A general channel, which is kind of a default channel that Slack creates. Just resources I created during this conference call because the resources are beginning to get buried in threads of discussion. And so I'm asking people to post just the resources there and also in the thread of discussions. Pandemic reflections, I just started that thread for people who want to talk about, I'm sitting up in my son's room, staring in a corner where I have my computer set up, and this is a different work experience for me. Random is a default channel that is set up for random ideas. I would probably take it out if I could, but I think that's part of Slack. CD Underbelly are jokes, puns, some things that have been coming out around the coronavirus. So that is an outlet for folks who want to do that. You don't have to sign up for any of these channels, but if you do sign up for it, then it becomes part of that listing of channels that you have. But you might not see them unless you go and check out what the channels are that are available. Self-care is up there. Social is one that we created. No, that's created as a default for people who just want to have conversation. Tech help for people who have specific technology help, and then telemental health for questions that are more related to providing services online and providing supervision online. So there are probably close to 200 folks signed up in this, and I appreciate that. For that, I hope that helps with a description of how to do it. You click on a channel and then you'll see all the threads in that channel, all the conversations in that channel, and you can respond. Now, if there is a particular topic in that channel, if you click on the post, you'll see a little cartoon bubble come up. And that cartoon bubble will allow you to reply to that question or to reply to that comment. If you just reply to the thread, it gets buried in the line of what's being discussed. But if you want to reply directly to that post or that resource, you can, again, put your mouse on top of it and you can start a it's called start a thread, which means it's taking this off to the side like a branch where people can have a conversation about it. I'm looking at it from a desktop perspective. Slack has tablet and smartphone apps, and I'll go to that when I'm not around my desktop. So that's how it works. This was set up for businesses originally as sort of a intranet for people to have these kinds of conversations.
All right, well, thanks, Marty. I appreciate that. I wanted to ask, and we've got about 5 or 10 minutes left here. If there's any additional folks who want to share before we kind of wrap things up, just a couple reminders. Marty's posted a couple of times the link here for Slack. You can also check this out on acesonline.net. The special edition webinars is a big banner on the front of the page. You'll be able to see this recording, the previous two, and the one for this afternoon, should you so desire, as well as the links for resources.
Are we posting the text of the chat too? Because I've got those aside.
Yeah, I have them here. It's taking me a little bit longer to get through, but I hope to have those posted there as well within the next few days.
Okay.
So we're going to get those up on the site as well for everybody to see. But just wanted to let everybody know that all those links are there too, as well as the videos, like I said. So I don't see anything additional here in the chat in terms of folks wanting to share. Marty, if you're ready, we can wrap things up. Anything else you want to add?
I was just going to post the links to join the Slack, and also to the post a tip. And so if you want to take us out after that comes up, that'd be great.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm gonna post a link too, because I don't want to be left out. The ACES Online site link is here. It's acesonline.net/ACES webinar series. The Slack link is up here for everyone who needs it. I really appreciate everybody joining us today, taking the time out to share, to post here in the chat, and just be a part of this experience and supporting one another. Again, check the chat out if you want to get those links. I'll leave the training session here open for a few moments so you can grab those. I want to thank Marty as well for being here, and look forward to the next one.
Yeah, and we've got 40 minutes to refuel, take the dog outside, say hello to my spouse, and then we're back for another one.
Right, caffeinate and do it again for me. All right, everybody. Well, take care, and we'll see you on the next one.